Is LeBron close to surpassing MJ in your book?
No,
Not at all. Where do you rank him? Like top five, top seven?
and well, definitely top 3. But I don't like having this conversation because I actually know all these guys, but I know LeBron, and I think this is LeBron's plan.
Lakers guards were rushing to hide the video, but everyone already knew the truth. What happened that night in MSG Tunnel was not just a small argument between two old friends. It was the moment when years of held back anger finally came out in the open, and nothing was going to be the same after that. It was February 2026, and the Los Angeles Lakers had just walked off the Madison Square Garden court after one of the most embarrassing losses of the season. The final score was 112 to 100, but even that number made it sound closer than it really was. Luka Doncic finished with 30 points, looking sharp and fully of energy. And then there was a LeBron James who had 22 points but looked every single bit of his 41 years of age. His legs were heavy, his reaction were slow, and the MSD crowd was not kind about it all. After the buzzer, LeBron started walking through the tunnel, probably already thinking about what he was going to say on his next podcast to explain the loss. But what he did not expect was what he was waiting for him just around the corner. Standing there, leaning against the wall like he owned the building, was Shaquille O'Neal, all 325 pounds of him, 7 feet of pure 1990s energy, and he was not smiling. He did not say hello, he just looked LeBron straight in the eyes and said the one thing that made everyone that tunnel go completely silent. And trust me, what he said next changed everything. Shaq looked at LeBron and asked him how he could possibly call this era of basketball hard when the league had become a place where even looking at a player the wrong way could be called a foul. LeBron tried to respond. He started talking about speed, about how the modern games moves faster, about how the pace in 2026 is not like what it used to be. But Shaq was not interested in hearing any of that. He cut LeBron off before he could even finish and told him straight to his face that speed does not matter when nobody is even allowed to touch you. He said the only reason LeBron kept talking about pace and speed was because he was too scared to admit the real truth, that his body was getting old and that he had spent his entire career playing in the softest era that NBA had ever seen. And Shaq did not stop there. He brought up Anthony Davis, he brought up Joel Embiid, he brought up every big star who had been missing games with small injuries. And he used all of them as proof that today's players simply did not carry the toughness that the older generation had every single night. The argument got so loud and so intense that Lakers staff members in their suites were actually trying to move Shaq away from LeBron, which, if you think about it, is one of the most impossible jobs any person could ever have. Other people in that tunnel just stood in the shadows, watching, not saying a single word, because they all knew this was much bigger than one bad game. Now, to understand why Shaq finally snapped, you have to go back and look at the numbers because the numbers tell a story that completely destroy LeBron's whole argument. LeBron had been saying on his podcast that the game today is faster and harder than it ever was before. But when you actually look at the stats, the average pace in 1985 was 102. Right now, in 2026, it has dropped back down around 99.5. The 1985 Denver Nuggets were running at the pace of 107, which would make most modern teams collapse by the third quarter. And the Showtime Lakers were doing all of the while getting grabbed, shoved, and hit on every single possession. There was no protection back then, there was no softball call to save you, there was only surviving the night and coming back the next day to do it all over again. And if you really want to understand how different things were, just think about the Jordan rules. The Detroit Pistons did not just have a game plan to stop Michael Jordan, they had a written guide on exactly how to hurt him without getting thrown out of the game. Every single time MJ went to the basket, he was hitting the floor. That was just normal basketball then. Now compare that what LeBron was doing in 2026, spending $1 million every single year on his body, flying on a private jet with full-size beds, eating food prepared by a personal chef, and sleeping in luxury hotel after every game. Back in 1980s, Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson were flying on regular planes, fighting fans for armrest space and checking into a normal hotels just like everybody else. That was the life of an NBA superstar in that era. And not a single one of them ever went on a podcast to complain about how hard it was. Shaq had actually been building up to his moment for a long time. Throughout 2025, into 2026, he had been saying publicly that nobody in the league was ever truly scared of LeBron the way they were scared of Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. He said it clearly and without any hesitation. When you went up against MJ or Kobe, you did not just worry about losing the game. You were terrified of getting embarrassed, of having your confidence completely broken in front of everyone watching. But with LeBron, you respected the stats, sure, but nobody was losing sleep the night before. Nobody was sitting in their huddle room thinking that tomorrow was going to be a nightmare because LeBron James was on the other side of the court and Shaq was not the only one who felt this way. When he was asked on Netflix to rank his top 10 players of all time, he put Michael Jordan at number 1, Kobe Bryant at number 2, and slid LeBron down to number 3. And then when NBC News asked him name all the starting 5, he picked MJ, Kobe, Larry Bird, Karl Malone, and Hakeem Olajuwon. He left LeBron out completely. He even left himself out. And when the person asking the question pointed that out, Shaq did not blink, did not pause, and did not take it back. His message was simple. If he was building a team to win the most important game of his life, he needed two players who were not worried about the podcast downloads or the personal brand. Then the Paul Pierce got involved, and things got even louder. Pierce's word went on his show called No Falls, given the look like he was ready to jump straight through the camera. He was sitting there with Danny Green, who was trying to defend the modern game, and Pierce just cut him off completely mid-sentence. He said that LeBron was out there talking to the speed and pace, but all of that so-called speed was fake because the referees would not let anyone touch anybody anymore. He reminded everyone that back in 2000s, if you tried to run a high-speed play without a real plan, someone like Ben Wallace or Kevin Garnett was putting you into the stanchion. There was a real physical price you had to pay just to cross half court, and every single player knew it, accepted it's a part of the game. And Pierce had personal history with LeBron that made all of this hit even harder. These two had been going back and forth since that 2008 playoff series where both of them dropped 40 points in Game 7. Pierce never forgot that LeBron eventually had to leave Cleveland and go to Miami just to finally get past him. So when Pierce saw LeBron on that podcast acting like the game today was harder than anything that came before, he took it as something personal. He said that LeBron was only pushing the argument now at exactly this moment in time because he was starting to struggle to keep up with the youngest star in 2026 and needed a reason that made it sound like was not his fault. And the most painful part, Everything Pierce said was his final point, that the tough enforcer type player were now completely gone from the league forever. And because of that, stars today were putting up huge number against nobody in a game that had been cleaned up and softened beyond recognition. And then came the moment that hurt more than anything Shaq or Pierce had said. On January 29, 2026, for the first time in 21 long years, the NBA announced its All-Stars started and LeBron James was not on the list. Just think about how enormous that was. This was a man who had been a guaranteed all-star starter since most of his fans were still children in school. For over 2 decades, his name was the first one that got called. But this time, the fans voted, the media voted, and the players voted. And when all the results came in, LeBron had finished ninth in the Western Conference front court voting with only 3 media votes, ninth place. In his own conference, that was not just a snub, that was the entire basketball world telling him quietly but clearly his time the top was over. And Shaq made sure everyone understood exactly what that meant. When the TV panel was picking up their All-Star Reserve section live on air, Shaq did not put LeBron on his list. And when someone asked him about it directly, he did not sugarcoat his answer. He said he did not even want to see LeBron coming off the bench because at this point it would just be a pity selection and LeBron deserved better than that. That sounds like a kind thing to say on the surface, but everyone in that room and everyone watching at home understood exactly what Shaq was really saying. He was saying that the king had become someone you felt sorry for, and that was somehow even worse than being ignored completely. Charles Barkley then stepped in and dropped his own bombshell. He said he was absolutely certain that this was LeBron's last season with the Lakers and that he fully expected LeBron to go back to Cleveland for one final goodbye. And suddenly everything started to make sense. LeBron had known for the weeks that the All-Star results were going to be a disaster for his image. So he went on his podcast ahead of time and started pushing this argument about the game being harder today than it ever was before. He was trying to move the conversation away from his declining performance and back toward to the old MJ versus LeBron debate, where he always felt more comfortable. It was a smart move, but it was also a desperate one, and the legend saw right through it immediately. Magic Johnson had already spoken in September 2025 and made it clear that longevity alone that did not make someone the greatest. Ron Harper, who had won championship with both the Jordan Bulls and the Shaq Lakers, saw LeBron podcast comment on posted on X without any long explanation. He just wrote that the excuses were stupid. That was it. No paragraph, no detailed argument, just 4 words from a 62 years old man who played 80 games a season while guarding the best player on the floor every single night without oxygen tanks or private chefs or any of the modern comforts that LeBron had built his late career around. And that is the real reason why this whole situation cuts so deep. LeBron had spent his entire career telling the world that he respected the legends who came before him. He talked about Jordan, he talked about Magic, he talked about the history of the games like it meant everything to him. But moment things got uncomfortable, the moment his body started slowing down and the young star started passing him by, he turned around, said the era that produced all of those legends was actually the easier one. He essentially told every man who bled and fought and sacrificed their bodies to build this league that what they did was not hard as what he was doing now. And those men, every single one of them heard it loud and clear. So here is where everything stands. LeBron has the scoring record, he has the rings, he has the longevity, but the one thing he never managed to collect, the one thing that no podcast or personal brand or billion-dollar empire could ever buy him was the fear factor. The kind of fear that made grown men lose sleep the night before a game. The kind of respect that did not need a show to explain it or a podcast to defend it. Shaq had it, Jordan had it, Kobe had it. And one of the cold February night in the MJ's tunnel with the crowd still buzzing upstairs, the Lakers staff scrambling around them. Shaq looked LeBron in the eyes and reminded him exactly that the legend had already made their choice and now has the rest of the world.